following thoughts are paraphrased from Notes on Religion in 1776, Notes on Virginia in 1781, and letters to John Adams and others. Of all the systems of morality, ancient or modern, which have come under my observation, none appear to me to be so pure as that of Jesus. But in extracting the pure principles which he taught, we should have to strip off the artificial vestments which have been muffled by priests for riches and power for themselves. I have stripped my Bible of extraneous words and found pure and unsophisticated doctrines remaining, the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man. That we may promote the happiness of those with whom he has placed us in society by acting honestly towards all, benevolently to those who fall within our way, respecting the rights and cherishing the freedom of conscience for all. I never will, by any word or act, bow to the shrine of intolerance. We are bound, you and I, and everyone, to maintain the common right of freedom of conscience. Truth will do well enough if left to shift for herself. Error alone needs the support of government. Truth can stand by itself. We may hope that the dawn of reason and freedom of thought in these United States will do away with all this artificial scaffolding and restore us to benevolent morals, promotion to happiness, and respect and freedom to all. Thomas Jefferson. My purpose in speaking with you today is to remind us all that the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence were a courageous and visionary assembly of like-minded people, and they had the extraordinary brilliance to create a governing paradigm of a representative republic of its citizens. That government allowed for freedom of thought. Today, these inspired men and women are said by historians to have been Unitarian Universalists. I'll attempt to explain the connection of these two topics, the Declaration of Independence and Unitarianism, and how they became interwoven in North America. Some thoughts on the origin of the Declaration of Independence. The creation of the Republic by the founding fathers was largely shaped by a philosophy called rationalism. The term called rationalism uses reason as the chief source of knowledge. In such thinking, by 1776 in the colonies, there was also a conviction that religions had contributed significantly to the problem of governing people. This new kind of thinking put people, not dictatorial governments and churches, at the forefront. This was dangerous thinking to monarchies and churches worldwide in the 18th century. This radical talk was a death warrant to the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They were told in writing that anyone who signed a document declaring independence was literally facing a death sentence. If the colonies were not successful in separating from British rule, all 56 names listed on the Declaration of Independence would be hanged. When the Declaration of Independence was read aloud for the first time to the general public in Philadelphia on July 4, 1776, it confused listeners. At the conclusion of the first public reading, a female audience member called out to Benjamin Franklin to explain what had just been listened to. "What sort of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin?" Franklin replied, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And an unintended byproduct of creating a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, also gave rise to a new religion in America, and today it is called the Unitarian Universalist Association. In writing the Declaration, education was an important factor. The Declaration of Independence came from very well-read future Americans who dared to believe that they could create a more perfect union. Most of the authors of the Declaration of Independence were well-educated. Of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 30 had a college degree, which was astounding in its time. In those days, one had to know both Greek and Latin languages in order to even attend advanced schooling. So these budding graduates read directly from the writings of Greek and Latin philosophers. And without question, these founding people were also very well read on current thinking about the highest ideals by the world's best Enlightenment writers. The founders were familiar with leading-edge thought from philosophical, spiritual, and scientific writings. Writers included Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, René Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am," Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and François-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire. Voltaire was a popular writer of the day who was often humorously critical of Christianity, especially the Roman Catholic Church. The more often a stupidity is repeated, the more it gets the appearance of wisdom. That's a quote of Voltaire. Voltaire advocated for freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and separation of church and state. Regarding spirituality, scholars of the 18th century were what we would say today religious rationalists. Many of the colonial movers and shakers were listed on a variety of church rolls, and they attended various denominations of organized churches in their day: Anglican, Episcopalian, Congregationalist, Quaker, Lutheran, Catholic, Huguenot, Methodist, Calvinist, Presbyterian, and others. They wisely attended their respective churches to conform to current social attitudes. They were also politically savvy enough to know where the crowds were. Also, there were no organized Unitarian churches in 1776. There were, however, deists. There was a widespread existence in the 18th century of a worldwide school of thought that questioned religious dictates and believed that we live in a rational world that was operated in what was then called a natural world. These rationalist thinkers were known then as deists, D-E-I-S-T-S. The natural world most often referred to that which could be observed or scientifically studied and or verified. One may think of the terms today of rationalism, deism, Enlightenment thinking, and Unitarianism thought as all interchangeable concepts. Deists believe that Jesus was an inspired leader, but not necessarily the Son of God. To these burned-out Christians, the idea of God was a bit of a sticky wicket for deists. Most believed in a God who had created man and then watchfully retired. God was a little bit like a watchmaker. In other words, God watches, but he never violates human free will, was how rationalists handled the God question in the 18th century. By 1776, deist thought had found very fertile ground in the colonies. George Washington, John Adams, Abigail Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Patrick Henry, and many others are today considered to have been of one mind about religion, and current historians refer to these deists as Unitarians. And then came Unitarianism. Though deism was symbolized in enlightened thinking, deist religious beliefs were never formalized into any kind of a religious faith. However, such beliefs gave rise to Unitarianism, which was brought formally into existence in the Americas by the 1790s. A note here, Unitarian ideas had been around in some form as early as 300 AD, and they were organized in England in 1774. Deists practiced governing principles that we know today as the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. First principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Third principle, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growths in our congregations. Fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. As contemporary Unitarian minister Reverend Barbara Wells Tenhove explains today, those principles to this day are not dogma or doctrine, but rather they are a guide for those of us who choose to join and participate in Unitarian Universalist communities. The current name, the Unitarian Universalist Association, was incorporated in 1961 with the merger of the American Unitarian Association with the American Universalist Association. Merger of the two religions, though, did return the God question. Most of the beliefs of the Unitarians and the Universalists concurred, and today UU hosts members with a large variety of spiritual beliefs. Ancient religions like Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Taoism, as well as many other spiritually comforting principles, including agnosticism, atheism, Native American earth-based spirituality, and Wiccans, are among many points of view that are respected in UU. Whatever one believes, spiritually speaking, is acceptable, though never proselytized in UU churches. There was, however, one difference between the Unitarians and Universalists in how the God question was answered. Universalists subscribed to the notion that universal facts can be discovered, as opposed to the Unitarian rationalist viewpoint that God observes a natural world that can be measured. The God question to Universalists was not that God is seen as a bearded old man sitting on a throne passing judgment to people. The idea that God may be discovered through universal facts hints at an awareness that supersedes man, rather than the watchmaker God role of the deists. Today, the awareness concept appears to accommodate some let me get this right because this is important. It appears to accommodate some quantum scientific research. By the 20th century, systematic investigation into topics like consciousness and synchronicity began to redefine what was once called the natural world. Today, it's something more like the nature of reality. And I point out to you that Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious. And Albert Einstein talked about the fact that God does not play dice with the universe, are examples of that awareness that supersedes man. By the 21st century, terms like multiverses, the God particle, universal consciousness, or unified field help to describe quantum field theories. They describe a force of omniscient information that connects everyone and everything. Thus, the combined Unitarian Universalist principles together certainly do beautifully accommodate cutting-edge quantum research. Speaking of synchronicities, there were interesting coincidences that helped found a new nation. By 1776, there were many astoundingly improbable events that created a call to action in the colonies. Here are just 6 of the many synchronous events that occurred. Point: the idea that so many like-minded people of the same age were gathered in the same place at the same time had never before occurred in recorded history. Point: the colonies were geographically at an advantage, with an ocean separating them from Europe and its antiquated social structure. Point: by being witness to a different culture's fighting style, the North American Indians, the colonial fighters waged a unique war. It would be very successful in fighting formidable England. Great Britain was then the world's largest empire, with the world's largest organized fighting force. And I point out, if any of you are familiar with the Battle of Kings Mountain, that can help explain. Point: Benjamin Franklin, in his early adulthood, had spent extensive time with leaders and elders of the Iroquois nation, who had a very successful way of governing their huge confederation. The Iroquois League encompassed First Nation people from Maine to Georgia, including the Cherokee. Franklin learned new models of governing, like a system of checks and balances for rulers, equal representation for all, including women, rotation of leadership. These were all exciting new ideas. In fact, the Iroquoian Constitution is the model of the United States Constitution. Point: colonists had an unlikely and powerful ally in the fraternity of the Masons. Masonry is the oldest fraternal brotherhood in the world. Besides financial assistance, Freemasons, as they were then called, had a secret worldwide network of influential, very influential people who supported the colonists' cause. Also, Mason philosophy dovetailed rationalist thought. Masons taught members to believe in brotherly love, charity for others, and to search for answers to universal questions of morality and salvation of the soul. George Washington, John Adams, John Hancock, and at least 9 other signers of the Declaration were verifiable Freemasons. They're on the books. Point. The concept of a representative republic was an idea whose time had come. There was vocal European support for the rebellion from tyranny and religious suppression. Many supportive watchers worldwide held their breath in anticipation that this crazy new idea might just work. So, to finish, here's my conclusion. Lest we stray too far away from the inspired genius that created the United States and Unitarianism, I ask you to listen to the following words carefully. This time, don't just remember them as memorizations that you learned in school. Instead, listen to the words of writers who exemplified what is true of all Unitarian, Deist, Universalist freethinkers today. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." The courage and inspiration that flowed from these words to Americans today is a core understanding of Americans that being able to think for oneself and have freedom is written directly into the Constitution of the United States. These idealistic words would inspire people worldwide for years to come. The very words I just read inspired courage in a president 87 years later who faced the challenge, the strongest challenge yet, to a young United States. Abraham Lincoln said so in his own handwriting. Anyone recall the Gettysburg Address? Lincoln believed wholeheartedly in those exact words I just read that were written into the Declaration of Independence. They were his guiding light, he said, in dark times. Heady thinking indeed. As the government of our revolutionary leaders created is not yet perfected, and not yet perfected to this day, so were the founders of this nation not perfect people. Their lives exhibited more than just virtues. I'm well aware they all had weaknesses, and I think we all know quite a few of them today. Having weaknesses, though, is a trait of being human. It's how we learn. Their weaknesses in no way diminish the awe-inspiring accomplishment of these brave men and women who invented a free nation and inadvertently revolutionized the idea of what religion could be. I leave you with this mental picture. It touches my heart every time I read this paragraph. The quote comes from the award-winning writer Walter Isaacson in his biography that was titled Benjamin Franklin, An American Life. And I quote, "The notion of tolerance, humility, brilliance, creativity, and unshakable faith in the potential of the United States was shown at a funeral of this founding father on April 17, 1794. More than 20,000 people in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with a population of 28,000, attended the funeral of Benjamin Franklin. All 35 ministers 35 ministers of the city of Philadelphia and the rabbi of the Jews linked arms and marched arm in arm, following his casket to the grave.